Hi again, welcome to the second part of the first episode of the Jakarta Show podcast. The episode was getting a bit on the long side, so I hope you don't mind me splitting it in half. So I was going to talk about the different areas of Jakarta that are worth having a wander around, and what you can see and do in these parts. I always think that there are three main areas of the city as far as exploring the city's history and culture goes. That's not to say that the rest of the city is boring, but if you are short on time, then these areas will give you the most memories of the city in the shortest period of time. These three areas are the Old Town, known as Kota Tua, the Chinatown area centred on Glodok, and the area of central Jakarta around the National Monument. So let's start with Kota Tua, the centre of the city during the Dutch colonial era, when Indonesia was known as the Dutch East Indies, and of which Jakarta was the capital city and was back then known as Batavia. The centre of this area is the large city square now known as Fatahillah Square, which is surrounded by grand old colonial buildings that are very Dutch in appearance. Fatahillah Square is a popular destination for locals as there are many museums, street performers, and hundreds of brightly painted bikes that you can hire and ride around the square, but more about here later. The colonial heart of the city extended over several blocks, and with its canals and European-style buildings, Batavia really did look like the Amsterdam of the East. However, with the growth of the city, central Jakarta became the commercial and governmental heart of the city, and the old town fell into disrepair. Luckily though, over the last 10 or so years, a lot of the old buildings have been salvaged and the area cleaned up to become an area for recreation. And no trip to Jakarta is complete without a visit. So how to get to Kota Tua? Well, another grand building that the Dutch built in this part of town is Jakarta Kota Station, which once upon a time was the main train station for Jakarta. It still is the biggest of the city's stations, and although a few intercity trains still start from Kota Station, its main use is as a terminus for commuter trains from Bekasi and Bogor, and so all you need to do is take a commuter line train heading for Kota, which costs just 3,000 rupiah. You can also get here by busway, as next to the train station is a terminus of line 1 of the busway. And if you're feeling really adventurous, you can also arrive here by one of the light blue small minibuses known as Angkots that run along the main road through Glodok up to Kota Tua. Opposite the busway station are two huge old white buildings that used to be banking headquarters, and are now the Museum Mandiri and the Museum of the Bank of Indonesia. They are fine old Dutch buildings with stained glass windows, huge rooms, and Art Deco architecture, but unless you're really into the history of banking Indonesia, then you probably don't need to visit both of these. Walking past the bank museums brings you to the start of the pedestrianised area that leads to Fatahillah Square. Here you will find some of the old buildings converted into cafes, and even a 3D fun art selfie gallery type thing. There are also loads of street performers, who people like to take selfies with. The main square itself is dominated on one side by the huge old City Hall, which is very similar in appearance to that of the City Hall of Amsterdam. The building is now home to the Jakarta History Museum, and is full of old Dutch furniture. The square also contains an old Dutch water fountain and the huge Cannon C. Jaguar. This cannon has a fair bit of history, having been created several hundred years ago by the Portuguese in Macau by melting down 16 smaller guns. It was then sent to Malacca before ending up in Jakarta with the Dutch. The cannon also has a bit of a legend associated with it. The clenched fist at the end of the cannon is a symbol of a sexual nature, and as a result the cannon became a place where women who wanted to get pregnant would visit, placing flowers and sitting astride the cannon in the hope that this would help them conceive. The cannon used to be in the garden of the old City Hall, but was moved a few years ago to a more prominent spot in the square and surrounded by a fence, I guess to deter any would-be broody climbers. The square is also full of people riding around on brightly painted bikes, wearing matching coloured hats. I've no idea why, but it does seem to be the thing to do to rent one of these bikes and ride around the square. Around the square are several other old colonial buildings, one of which is the Wang Museum, set in what used to be an old Dutch church. Here you can learn all about Indonesian shadow puppets, and there is also a puppet maker in one of the buildings around the corner that you might just be able to get to visit. Close by to the Wang Museum is Cafe Batavia, a bar and restaurant that is decorated in the style of the colonial 1930s, and you really do feel like you are stepping back in time when you enter here. Upstairs is a dining room with huge shuttered windows and a great view over the rest of the square. It's definitely worth a visit to rest for a while, and treat yourself to a cocktail. Go on, you deserve it. Other old buildings around the square include the old post office, which now houses a massive souvenir market, and the ceramic museum, which houses loads of Indonesian art. The busiest day to visit Fatehillah Square is on a Sunday, when the square is packed with families enjoying a day out. So don't be surprised to be asked to participate in many family photos as if you are some kind of celebrity. It's much quieter during the week, but remember that all the museums are closed on a Monday. At the back of the Fatehillah Square is one of the old canals. If you follow this, you'll soon come to the Chicken Market Bridge. An old Dutch-style drawbridge, like the ones you see over the canals of Amsterdam, and it's the last one remaining in Jakarta. Keep following this canal and you will soon come to the old harbour of Sunda Kelapa. Back in colonial times, this was the main port of Jakarta, until the bigger port was built at Tanjung Priok. It's still an operational port though for the old-style pinisi boats that take cargo all over Indonesia. These are mainly loaded by hand over possibly steep gangplanks. Ask the labourers if you can come on board and have a look around. They'll usually agree. You will also come across old men in small sampans that for about 100,000 rupiah will take you around the harbour, past loads of pinisi boats being loaded, and out and around the old Dutch lighthouses at the harbour entrance. You used to be able to get dropped off at Pasar Ikan, a shanty town of a fishing village made of small wooden buildings built over the water, which made for an interesting explore. The village now low has gone, demolished a few years ago as part of the river clearances intended to reduce the flooding that seems to be a regular feature of Jakarta. There was also a maritime museum close by, situated in several old 16th century Dutch warehouses. There was also the Sier Bandar Tower, which used to be a defence tower and was once the tallest building in Batavia, from which you can get a great view of the old harbour from the top. My favourite area of the city to explore though is Glodok, the Chinatown of Jakarta. The area is a little understated compared to Chinatowns in cities in other countries, and there is a reason for that. In the 1960s, Chinese script was banned in public places and ethnic Chinese were persuaded to say Indonesian-sounding names. Then during the riots of 1998, which were triggered by the Asian financial crisis, violence was directed towards the Indonesian Chinese community and Glodok saw wide-scale destruction. After which, many ethnic Chinese Indonesians left Glodok for West Jakarta or emigrated to other countries. Enough though still remained to keep the Chinese vibe of the place alive, and since the restrictions on Chinese culture were relaxed in the early 2000s, you will now see lanterns and Chinese text in the streets and buildings here. Glodok is a maze of small streets and markets, and getting lost in the back streets is part of the charm of the area. Though to be honest, it's pretty much impossible to get really lost, as the main area is bounded by Jalan Pancharang in the north, the Krukut River to the west, and by the main road Jalan Gajah Mada to the east. There are several streets in this area that deserve special mention. The first of these is Gangloria. Gangloria is more of a covered alleyway than a street, and as such isn't particularly long, but it has a deserved reputation as a place for food adventures. Gangloria starts with a small food court known as Taman Makan Gloria Mini, but don't be put off by its appearance. Take a seat and soak up the Chinese vibe of the place that feels like it hasn't changed in decades. Here you can find dishes such as mee kangkung, which is noodles with water spinach, kare ayam, an unspicy chicken curry, and gado gado, a dish typical of Jakarta's Betawi heritage, but more about gado gado later. You can also get a bintang here with your food. Unfortunately though, the food court closes in the early afternoon, which is a pity as it feels like it would be a great place to enjoy a beer and something to eat in the evening. Opposite the food court is the entrance to the covered alley that is Gangloria. It starts off with fruit and veg stalls, but you soon arrive at a section selling foods, either from street vendors or shops. The most famous of these shops, I guess, are Kopi Es Taki, a very old shop selling iced coffee, as well as pork nasi campur, which is a kind of mixture of different types of barbecue pork dish. There's also Soto Betawi Afong, a shop specialised in Soto Betawi, a type of beef soup traditional to Jakarta. In the alleyway here you will find street sellers offering dishes such as turtle stew, pig intestines, siomai, noodles, and all sorts of things. You can spend all day here trying all the different foods, if you're feeling adventurous. Gangloria ends on the main road of Jalan Pancharang, which is another interesting street to explore. So, Jalan Pancharang. This street starts off at the junction with Jalan Gajah Mada, where many years ago there used to be a huge Chinese archway. It's sadly long gone now, but you will still know that you're in the right place, as on the corner is the Pantoran Tea House. This old Chinese building for many years used to be a traditional medicine shop, but has now been transformed into a place where you can enjoy traditional Chinese foods, as well as a fine selection of premium Chinese teas in a very traditionally styled setting. It's definitely an experience. As you walk along Jalan Pancharang, you will pass many Chinese medicine shops where you can see the practitioners weighing out the dried ingredients on small hand balances to create the desired medicine in a way that hasn't changed for decades. On both sides of the street are crowded 5-foot ways with shops selling all kinds of things. There are many interesting places where you can try traditional Chinese Indonesian foods. There are several small side streets that branch off from Jalan Pancharang, and one of these is Jalan Kemenangan. Jalan Kemenangan starts off as a gap in the bustling street market, with strings of Chinese lanterns overhead, but it soon changes and becomes a covered wet market with all the sights, sounds and smells you would expect. Fruit, vegetables and fresh fish are the main things on sale, although don't be surprised to find trussed up crabs and skinned frogs for sale. There are loads of traditional Chinese shops, and the red light of home shrines seems to peek out from the rooms of many buildings along the lane. You definitely feel that you're in a Chinatown here. Soon the market ends and you find yourself at a Jindiwan temple. This is the oldest Chinese temple in Jakarta and was famed for its beautiful wooden carvings and ornamental roof. Sadly, a fire in 2015 destroyed a lot of the roof, although it is being restored. The temple is very smoky and atmospheric and gets quite busy in the evenings, which is probably the best time to visit. There are a few other old Chinese temples in the back streets around here. These are much smaller, but none less atmospheric. There is also an old Chinese Catholic church, the Church of Santa Maria de Fatima, that looks more like a Chinese temple than a church from the outside. Getting to Glodok is pretty easy. You can either take Route 1 of the busway and get off at the Glodok halt, or take the commuter line train to Kota and walk down the main road, past all the street artists until you get to the side road where Gangloria starts, or continue until you come to the Pantoran Tea House on Jalan Pancharang. On the opposite side of Jalan Gajah to Glodok is the area known as Mangga Besar, another traditionally Chinese area, and one with a bit of a reputation these days, as a red light district. But don't let this put you off. If it wasn't for the street vendors selling Viagra and the like, you would be none the wiser. The main street, Jalan Mangga Besar Raya, is sandwiched between Olimo busway station at one end and Mangga Besar train station at the other, and becomes a bustling sea of life most evenings, full of street warungs, durian stalls, caged cobras, ondel-ondel, and even the odd banshee or two ready to dance for your small change. It's a great place for people watching, and definitely edgier than other streets with night food markets such as Jalan Sabang. There's even a hostel slap bang in the middle of all this, called Sleepy Raccoon, situated in a side street just off the main street of Jalan Mangga Besar Raya. I really haven't done Mangga Besar the justice it deserves, and it's only 3,000 rupiah by commuter train from either Kota or Cikini stations, so if you do have an evening to spare when you're in Jakarta, then it's definitely worth an hour or two of your time to have a wander. It's certainly more of an authentic slice of the vibe of Jakarta than hanging out in one of the many shopping malls, well, in my opinion anyway. The other area worth an explore is central Jakarta. The sites though here are a lot more spread out, so expect to do a fair bit of walking. The focal point of this area has to be the Monument Nasional, or Monast as it's affectionately known, a huge obelisk in the middle of the massive open space that is Merdeka Square, which was built to commemorate the struggle for Indonesian independence. It is also known as Sukarno's last erection, due to its phallic shape and the fact that he was the president who authorised its construction before being deposed before its full completion. The Monast is 137 metres tall, and you can take a lift all the way to the observation deck at the top for an incredible view of the city. The capacity of the observation deck and the lift are limited, so be prepared to wait at weekends and holidays. Inside the base of the Monast are dioramas depicting scenes from Indonesian history and the struggle for independence. But it's a view from the top that's its real selling point, so try not to miss out on this. Next to the Monast is a market selling cheap souvenirs and also a large food court. Also close to Monast in Merdeka Square is the Monast Dancing Fountain, a light, sound and water spectacular that occurs every Saturday and Sunday evening, and is actually really good. Better still, it's free. So if you are in Jakarta during the weekend, then it's definitely worth a visit. On the opposite side of Merdeka Square to Gambir Station is a big old white colonial building with a bronze statue of an elephant in front of it. This is the National Museum of Indonesia, and it's full of historical and ethnographical artifacts from all over Indonesia. There are all kinds of interesting things in here, especially if you're interested in visiting some of the more remote regions. Also quite close to Merdeka Square on the Gambia side is the huge Istiklow Mosque, which is the biggest mosque in Southeast Asia and the sixth largest in the world. Like the Monast, this was another of President Sukarno's grand projects, and it's worth a look around if you have the time, as is the Catholic Jakarta Cathedral on the opposite side of the road. Also close by is Pasar Baru, the Little India of Jakarta. There are a few streets that are worth a wander down in this part of the city. First of these is Jalan Surabaya, which is close to Cikini train station. This street is home to absolutely loads of small shops selling all kinds of antiques and curios. You will literally be amazed at some of the things you can find down here. Be warned though, you will need to bring your haggling A game if you do find something that takes your fancy. Another of these streets is Jalan Jaksa, the old backpacker street of Jakarta. This is quite close to Gambia station and still has a few bars, travel agencies and cheap places to stay. It also has a laundry shop, which is very handy if you're passing through Jakarta. Jalan Jaksa though has seen better days, but it is a place where you can find cheap beers and there are still a few backpackers hanging around. Also in central Jakarta is Jalan Sabang, a street that becomes full of street warungs in the evening where you can try all different kinds of Indonesian foods. Talking of foods, there are some dishes that have originated from Jakarta that maybe you should try. The locals of Jakarta and the surrounding area are known as the Betawi people, and Betawi food and culture has taken up elements from Chinese, Arabic, Indian, Malay and Dutch settlers over the last 500 or so years. Indonesian food is everywhere in the city, but if you want to try a true taste of Betawi food, then a couple of dishes to look out for are gado-gado and soto Betawi. Gado-gado is a dish made of a mixture of blanched vegetables, boiled egg, tofu and tempeh, all smothered in a slightly spicy peanut sauce. And it's pretty easy to find, although there is a place called Gado-gado Direxi in the food court at the top of Gangloria and Glodok, which I always like to visit when I'm wandering around Chinatown, as not only is it very tasty, but you can watch the women freshly prepare your peanut sauce and then wash it down with a beer. Soto Betawi is a beef soup cooked in both cow and coconut milk with potato, tomato, and aromatic herbs and spices. It also contains beef offal, so if you're not feeling up to eating tripe or tendon, then maybe ask for it not to be included. If you are wandering around Glodok, then there is quite a famous shop selling it down Gangloria called Soto Betawi Afung. Well, I hope that I have piqued your interest with this episode. Don't forget that if you have any questions about Java that you would like me to talk about next time, then just leave a comment below or drop me a message on the @The Java Show page on Facebook, and I'll try to answer your questions in an upcoming episode. The next episode will be out in early May, and I'll be talking about all you need to know about travelling by train in Java. So subscribe and click on the bell to get notified as soon as it's uploaded. So until then, sampai jumpa lagi.